I always thought I knew who my mother was. She was warm but guarded, loving but distant in ways I never quite understood. Growing up, I never questioned it. We lived a quiet life in a small coastal town in Maine, where everyone knew everyone, or at least thought they did. My father had died when I was 3, or so I'd always been told. There were no photos of him in the house, no stories, no traces. Every time I asked, my mother's eyes softened in that way that told me not to ask again. When she passed away last spring, I felt hollow, as if the world had lost its color. She'd battled a long illness in silence, refusing to let me or anyone help her. I thought grief would be the end of it, just memories and empty rooms. But grief, I would soon learn, was just the beginning of something else entirely. A few weeks after her funeral, I returned to her house to begin sorting her things. It was quiet, too quiet, and everything smelled faintly of her favorite lavender soap. The kind of scent that makes you both comforted and shattered at once. I went through her drawers, her books, her closet, finding nothing more than old scarves, worn-out notebooks, and faded photographs, until I opened the chest at the foot of her bed, the one she never let me touch. Inside were bundles of envelopes, neatly tied with a silk ribbon. My name was on the first one, written in her delicate handwriting. My heart began to pound. For a moment, I thought maybe she'd written something for me before she died, a final goodbye. But when I opened it, I saw that the date at the top read May 3rd, 2002. I was 6 years old then. The letter began. My dearest Matthew, if you are reading this someday, it means you've grown up enough to understand the truth about where you come from. I froze. The tone was somber, the words heavy. She wrote about a man named Daniel, not my father, she said, but the man who wanted to be. I kept reading, my throat tightening as she revealed piece by piece that my real father was someone else. Someone she'd loved deeply but had to leave because he wasn't safe. I sat there for hours, reading letter after letter. There were over 30 of them, spanning years. In some, she described how she'd moved from one town to another, always afraid someone might find her. She mentioned watching the news and being relieved he hadn't escaped. I didn't understand any of it, at least not yet. The last letter was dated just a month before her death. It read, "He tried to reach out again. After all these years, he found me. I hope you never meet him, Matthew. Some truths are too heavy to carry." The next morning, I couldn't stop thinking about those words. He found me. I decided to look for answers. I went to the local records office, digging through archives, birth certificates, and old court filings. That's when I found something that nearly made me drop the folder I was holding, a newspaper clipping from 1994. It was about a man named Thomas Lang, wanted in connection to the murder of a woman in Boston. The article mentioned that he'd disappeared after the incident, leaving behind his fiancée, a woman named Claire Johnson, my mother's maiden name. The air left my lungs. My mother had been engaged to a man accused of murder, and that man was my father. I drove home in a haze, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. That night I couldn't sleep. Every memory of her fear of strangers, her insistence on locking the doors twice, her refusal to talk about the past, suddenly made sense. She'd been running from him, running from the truth. A week later, I decided to find out whether Thomas Lang was still alive. After a few calls and some help from a retired police officer, I learned that he had died in prison 5 years ago. The report said he'd been serving a life sentence for a second-degree murder conviction. When I saw his mugshot, I felt sick. The resemblance was undeniable, my eyes, my hair, my jawline. It was like staring at an older, broken version of myself. For days, I couldn't speak to anyone. I felt betrayed and hollow at the same time. I couldn't decide what hurt more, that my mother had lied to me, or that she'd carried this pain alone for so long just to protect me. Eventually, I returned to the chest. Beneath the letters, there was a small box. Inside, I found a locket with 2 photos, one of me as a baby and one of a man holding me in his arms. He looked gentle, not like the monster the headlines had painted him to be. There was also a cassette tape labeled "For When He's Ready." I borrowed an old tape player and pressed play. Her voice filled the room, soft, trembling, tired. "Matthew, if you're hearing this, it means I couldn't tell you in person. You deserve to know who your father was and who he was. Thomas made mistakes. terrible ones, but he also saved my life once. The man he killed wasn't innocent. He was the man who hurt me and would have hurt you. Tears blurred my vision. My mother's words broke everything I thought I knew. I kept it from you, she continued, because I didn't want you to grow up with the shadow of what he did. You were born out of fear, yes, but also out of love. Please forgive me for not telling you sooner. I hope one day you'll understand. When the tape clicked off, I just sat there in silence. The world outside felt unreal. I drove to the beach that night, the same one she used to take me to when I was little. I sat by the water for hours, watching the tide move in and out, thinking about the life she'd lived, always protecting, always hiding, never free. Grief comes in waves, but this was different. It wasn't just about losing her. It was about losing the illusion of her, and yet somehow loving her more for it. I eventually returned to my life, but nothing was ever the same again. I kept one of the letters framed in my room, the first one, where she called me her reason for surviving. Sometimes I still listen to that tape. Her voice reminds me that love isn't always perfect or pure. Sometimes it's messy and desperate and full of pain. But in the end, it's still love.